have to be able to revisit those classroom norms, those classroom agreements all the time, and not just in a negative way. So, if someone is not following an agreement, many times that's when those agreements are pointed out and used. But students have to also know when they are following the agreements as well, and what they're doing to contribute to that classroom community.
What happens a lot often is after the couple weeks of school, they end up just being like decoration, like wallpaper hanging on the wall. They're not kept alive. And that's what's really important, is that and we need to keep them alive by checking in with them every single day and multiple times throughout the day. And teachers always say to me, I don't have time for this, right? It's always about time. However, I like to think of it as an investment, right? Because if we can stick to those agreements, we're probably going to be dealing with less challenges in the classrooms. But many ways you can keep them alive can be quick. They don't always have to be a whole discussion about the agreements, right? For example, if you had an agreement to actively participate during class discussions, you can ask your students, like the whole class, okay, everyone, I want you to rate yourself from a 1 to a 5 in your head. They don't have to share. How do you think you're doing with classroom participation during discussions? And then if they are a 3 or below, right, if they're low on the class participation, you just have them think about what is one thing that they can do to increase their participation. So for example, ask a question, volunteer to take notes, right? So getting them to think about their contribution to the agreements. You can say at the beginning of a lesson or the beginning of the day, okay, everyone, I want you to have a look at our classroom agreements. Which ones do you want to work on this morning? Which one are you going to focus on? We hope they're doing all of them, but, we want them to reflect on their own behavior and where are they, with these agreements. If you had an agreement to be respectful, ask them as a whole class, okay, everyone, I want you to give me a thumbs up, a neutral, or a thumbs down to reflect on how we're doing with respect in our classroom. So if you have a whole group of thumbs up, you're good to go. Everyone's like, yep, we're being respectful, you move on. If you had everyone with thumbs down, then you probably want to address that before you move on, because they're probably not in a great place for learning anyway, right? You don't always have to have a whole discussion unless you can see there's really a challenge with that agreement.
If you're reading a book, for instance, you can talk about the characters in terms of, well, what are these life lessons? How are they applicable? What connections can I make to my life now, to what's happening in our society now? And just by virtue of that, you're able to bring that into the classroom and start creating and talking about some of those norms. You should always revisit them because the needs of your students, they'll change.
But one of our main tools is to actually move away from praise and focus on encouragement. So if you are keeping them alive by focusing on, positive reinforcement, right? Like what they're doing well, be specific. Don't just say, great job listening, or I love the way so-and-so is sitting so quietly and ready to work. First of all, that's just empty praise. And when you point out what students are doing in hopes that other students are going to do it, it tends to be those same students that are following the agreements, and the other kids can't stand them, right? It causes challenges. So that's why you want to check in a little bit more with reflection. However, you could say to a group of students or even a student when they're working on a project, I noticed while you were working together, you were all taking turns listening to each other and sharing your ideas. You were really sticking with our agreement of ... So be really specific with it. Try to focus a lot on group, keeping the group agreements, because agreements are really about creating classroom community and culture. They're not so much about the individual and how they're performing in a sense. So really, how are we all contributing to a positive classroom community by sticking to the agreements that we created together. There is just one thing that's really helpful with sticking to the agreement. So I mentioned like there are kind of 3 pillars to any classroom. Like you need to have agreements, you need to have job sharing, like contribution, and you need to have routines. Like no classroom should be without those 3 things. And what I like to do, which is really helpful, so I don't have to be like always the one checking in on agreements, on my job list, I have a job is agreement checker. So I have a whole document of like, I don't know, it's like 10 ways to keep your agreements alive. And I give that to the agreement checker. And it's their job to say, okay, everyone, how we dealing with this? Or, before we start this group activity, check out the agreements. What are you going to focus on? And they do it. So then I don't become like the agreement police where I'm always the one checking in. And that's a really big help, especially with teenagers, with older kids, because they really can do that. And they're much more likely to listen to their peers than their teacher.